My husband said he needed $50K for emergency surgery overseas. I emptied my inheritance and caught him using my money for his mistress's IVF treatments. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica, and I need to share the most devastating betrayal I've ever experienced. I'm still processing everything that happened, but I feel like I need to tell this story because what my husband did to me was so calculated and cruel that I can't believe someone could be this manipulative. If this helps even one person recognize the red flags I missed, then it's worth sharing my humiliation. Let me start from the beginning. I'm 34, and I was married to David for 6 years. We met in college, and I thought he was the love of my life. David was charming, ambitious, and seemed to genuinely care about building a future together. We had what I thought was a solid marriage. We traveled together, shared similar goals, and I trusted him completely. That trust is what made his betrayal so devastating. About 2 years ago, my grandmother passed away. She was an incredible woman who had worked her entire life as a nurse and had been incredibly frugal, saving every penny she could. When she died, she left me her entire inheritance, $67,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was life-changing money for me. My grandmother had always told me to use it for something important, something that would make a real difference in my life. David and I discussed what to do with the money. We talked about using it as a down payment on a house, or maybe investing it for our future children's education. I was leaning toward the house option because we'd been renting a small apartment, and owning our own home felt like the next natural step in our marriage. But then, about 8 months ago, everything changed. David came home from work looking absolutely devastated. He sat me down and told me he'd been having some health issues that he'd been trying to hide from me because he didn't want me to worry. He said he'd been experiencing severe abdominal pain and had been seeing doctors privately. According to David, the doctors had found something concerning, a rare condition that required immediate specialized treatment. He showed me some medical documents that looked official, talked about how the condition was progressive and potentially fatal if left untreated. He said the only doctor who specialized in this particular condition was in Switzerland, and the treatment would cost around $50,000. I was horrified. My husband, the man I loved more than anything, was potentially dying, and he'd been suffering in silence to protect me from worry. I felt guilty that I hadn't noticed he was in pain, and I was terrified of losing him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked him, crying. "We're married. We're supposed to face these things together." David held me and said he'd hoped the doctors here could help him, but they'd exhausted all options. He said he was scared too, but that this Swiss specialist had an incredible success rate with his condition. The treatment involved a series of procedures over several months, and David would need to stay in Switzerland during that time. Without hesitation, I told him we'd use my inheritance. What was money compared to his life? My grandmother would have understood. She was a nurse. She knew the value of life and health above everything else. I told David we'd get him the treatment he needed, no matter what it cost. David seemed reluctant to take the money. He said it was my inheritance, that he felt terrible about using money my grandmother had left specifically for me. But I insisted. I told him that's what marriage meant, that his life was more important than any amount of money, and that we were a team. Looking back now, I realized that his reluctance was all part of the manipulation. He wanted me to insist on giving him the money, so I couldn't later say he pressured me into it. It was psychological manipulation at its finest, and I fell for it completely. We set up the transfer. I emptied my inheritance account and wired $50,000 to what David said was the Swiss medical facility. He showed me confirmation emails from the hospital and even gave me the name of his doctor, Dr. Mueller, who specialized in this rare abdominal condition. David left for Switzerland 3 weeks later. I drove him to the airport, crying and telling him how brave he was, how proud I was of him for fighting this disease. He held me tight and promised he'd call every day, that he'd beat this thing and come home to me healthy and ready to start our family. And he did call. Every day for the first 2 weeks, David would call me from the hospital. He'd tell me about his treatments, how difficult they were, how hopeful Dr. Muller was about his progress. He'd sound tired and sometimes in pain, which only reinforced my belief that he was genuinely suffering through these medical procedures. He sent me photos too, pictures of what looked like hospital rooms, IV bags, medical equipment. He'd text me updates about his treatment schedule and even sent me photos of Swiss landscapes, saying the hospital had beautiful views and that he was thinking of bringing me there for a vacation once he was better. I was working extra hours during this time, picking up overtime whenever possible, because our savings were depleted after the inheritance money went to his treatment. I wanted to make sure we'd have enough money for his follow-up care when he came home. I was also planning a big welcome home celebration for when his treatment was finished. After about 6 weeks, David said Dr. Muller was pleased with his progress, but that he needed to extend his stay for additional treatments. This would require another $15,000. I panicked. We didn't have that money, but David assured me that his insurance might cover some of it and that we could figure out financing for the rest. He said he was so close to being cured and that stopping treatment now could be dangerous. I started looking into loans, considering asking my parents for money, even thinking about selling my car. I would have done anything to make sure David got the treatment he needed. But then something happened that changed everything. My friend Lisa, who works for an international travel company, mentioned she was helping a client plan a trip to Switzerland. We were having coffee, and I told her about David's treatment there. I mentioned the name of the hospital and Dr. Muller, thinking maybe Lisa had heard of them since she dealt with Swiss travel frequently. Lisa looked confused. She said she'd never heard of that hospital, which was strange because she was very familiar with all the major medical facilities in Switzerland due to her work with medical tourism clients. She offered to look into it for me, maybe get some information about the facility that could help with David's insurance claims. 2 days later, Lisa called me with news that made my blood run cold. There was no hospital by that name in the location David had given me. There was no Dr. Mueller specializing in David's supposed condition. In fact, the address David had provided was for a residential apartment building in Zurich. At first, I thought there must be some mistake. Maybe David had given me the wrong address, or maybe the hospital was so specialized that it didn't show up in normal searches. I tried calling the phone number David had given me for the hospital, but it went straight to a voicemail in German that, when translated, was just a generic message. I was confused and starting to get worried. Not worried that David was lying, that possibility hadn't even entered my mind yet, but worried that maybe he was sicker than he'd told me. Maybe he was in some kind of private facility that was hard to track down. I decided to surprise him. I used our credit card to book a flight to Zurich, planning to show up at the hospital and surprise him with a visit. I thought seeing a familiar face might help with his recovery, and I missed him terribly. I told my work I was taking emergency family leave and boarded a plane to Switzerland. I took a taxi from the airport to the address David had given me for the hospital. When we pulled up to a residential apartment building, I thought the driver had made a mistake. But he showed me the address, and it matched exactly what David had given me. I stood on that Swiss street corner for probably 20 minutes, trying to make sense of what was happening. There was no hospital. There was no medical facility. Just a regular apartment building with regular people going about their lives. I called David's phone, and it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting him, asking where exactly the hospital was located, saying I was in Zurich and wanted to visit him. No response. That's when the terrible possibility started creeping into my mind. What if David wasn't sick? What if there was no treatment? What if he had taken my inheritance money and what? What could he possibly be doing with $50,000 in Switzerland? I spent the next few hours walking around the neighborhood, looking for any kind of medical facility, asking locals if they knew of any private hospitals in the area. Nothing. I checked into a hotel and spent the night trying to figure out what to do next. The next morning, I decided to hire a local private investigator. I know it sounds extreme, but I needed to know where my husband was and what was happening to him. I was still holding on to hope that there was some explanation, that maybe he was confused about the address due to his medical condition, or that he was being treated somewhere else. The investigator, Hans, was incredibly professional and efficient. Within 6 hours, he had located David. He was staying in a luxury apartment in a completely different part of Zurich, with a woman Hans described as blonde, early 30s, obviously pregnant. My world collapsed. Hans showed me photos he'd taken of David and this woman shopping for baby items, holding hands, David with his hand protectively on her pregnant belly. In one photo, they were looking at cribs. In another, David was kissing her forehead while she held up tiny baby clothes. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not catch my breath. My husband, who was supposed to be dying of a rare disease, was healthy, happy, and apparently expecting a baby with another woman, using my inheritance money. Hans gently suggested we follow them to get more information. We trailed them to a fertility clinic, where Hans was able to charm some information out of the receptionist. David and this woman, her name was Petra, had been undergoing IVF treatments. Expensive IVF treatments. They were scheduled for their final embryo transfer the following week. My inheritance money, the money my grandmother had saved her entire life, the money I had given to save my husband's life, was being used to help him create a family with his mistress. I sat in that rental car outside the fertility clinic and cried harder than I've ever cried in my life. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it. David hadn't just cheated on me. He had created an elaborate lie about being terminally ill to steal my money so he could start a family with another woman. But the story gets worse. Hans and I followed them back to their apartment, and I watched through their window as David and Petra had what looked like a very domestic conversation. Then I saw David pull out his laptop and show Petra something on the screen. They were both smiling and nodding. Later, Hans was able to determine that David had been showing Petra emails from me, emails where I was worried about our finances, where I was talking about picking up extra work to support his recovery, where I was saying how much I missed him and couldn't wait for him to come home healthy. They were laughing at me. David was sharing my heartbroken, worried emails with his pregnant mistress, and they were treating my pain like entertainment. That night, I called David from my hotel room. When he answered, he sounded exactly like he had been sounding for weeks. Tired, weak, like he was suffering through medical treatments. "Hi, honey," he said. "I was just about to call you. Had a rough day with treatments today. Dr. Muller thinks I might need another week here." I almost hung up right then. The performance was so convincing, so practiced, but I needed to hear what else he would say. "Actually," David continued, "the extended treatment is going to cost more than we thought. Dr. Muller wants to try a new protocol that could really make the difference, but it's another $10,000. I know it's a lot, but honey, I'm so close to beating this thing." He was asking for more money. Even after taking my entire inheritance, he wanted more. And not just for himself. He wanted me to fund his mistress's pregnancy, their new life together, while thinking I was saving his life. I hung up without saying a word. The next morning, I went to confront them directly. I had Hans wait outside while I knocked on their apartment door. When David answered, the look on his face was something I'll never forget. Pure terror, followed quickly by anger. "Jessica, what are you doing here? You can't be here. I'm sick. You could catch something," the doctor said. "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop." Petra appeared behind him, obviously pregnant, obviously confused about who I was. David hadn't even told his mistress that he was married. She thought I was some crazy woman stalking her boyfriend. I looked at David and said, "I want every penny of my money back. Today." David tried to continue the charade. He said he didn't understand what I was talking about, that I was clearly having some kind of breakdown, that stress was making me paranoid. He actually suggested that I needed psychiatric help. But when I told him I knew about the fertility clinic, about the IVF treatments, about the fact that there was no Dr. Muller and no rare medical condition, his whole facade crumbled. Petra started asking questions. "David, who is this woman? What is she talking about? What money?" That's when I realized that David had lied to Petra too. She didn't know he was married. She didn't know the money for their IVF treatments had come from his wife's inheritance. She thought he was a successful businessman who could afford these expensive treatments. The confrontation was ugly. David tried to make me out to be the villain, saying I was ruining his happiness, that he'd never loved me anyway, that he'd only married me for financial security. Petra was crying and asking if he was really married, if the baby they were having was going to break up a marriage. I told Petra everything, about the fake medical condition, about my inheritance, about the months of elaborate lies. I showed her the photos of the fake hospital documents, the emails David had sent me from Dr. Muller. Petra was horrified. She realized that not only was David married, but that he was a pathological liar who had stolen money from his wife to fund their relationship. She told David she never would have gone through with the pregnancy if she'd known he was married, that she felt sick knowing the IVF treatments were paid for with stolen money. David's response was to blame everyone but himself. He said I had driven him away with my boring personality and lack of ambition. He said Petra was being dramatic and that divorce happens all the time. He said he deserved to be happy and that the money was going to be ours anyway once we were married. So what difference did it make? The entitlement was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, David felt justified in what he'd done. I left Switzerland that day with Hans's help. He'd managed to get documentation of David's fraud, bank records showing the money transfers, evidence that the medical documents were forged, proof that David had been living with Petra while claiming to be in a hospital. When I got back home, I immediately filed for divorce and reported David for fraud. The legal process is still ongoing, but my lawyer is confident we can recover most of the money, especially since David used forged medical documents to obtain it. The hardest part of all of this isn't even the money, though that hurts. It's realizing that the man I loved for 6 years, the man I trusted with everything, was capable of such elaborate deception. For months, David looked me in the eye and lied about being terminally ill. He accepted my tears, my worry, my sacrifices, all while planning a new life with someone else using my money. I keep thinking about my grandmother, about how hard she worked to save that money. She was so careful with every dollar, so proud that she could leave something meaningful to her granddaughter. David didn't just steal from me, he stole from her memory, from her legacy. Petra actually reached out to me a few weeks after I returned home. She wanted to apologize and to let me know that she had ended things with David immediately after learning the truth. She said she couldn't be with someone capable of that level of deception and that she was going to raise the baby on her own. I actually felt sorry for her. She was as much a victim of David's lies as I was, just in a different way. David has tried to contact me several times since then. He sent emails saying he's sorry, that he never meant for things to go so far, that he just fell in love and made some bad decisions. He's also sent angry messages saying I'm vindictive and that I'm trying to ruin his life out of spite. The truth is, David ruined his own life. He had a wife who loved him unconditionally, who was willing to give him everything she had to save his life. He had financial security, a stable home, and a future full of possibilities. He threw all of that away for a lie so elaborate and cruel that I still can't fully comprehend it. I'm in therapy now, trying to process the trauma of this betrayal. My therapist says that people who are capable of this level of deception usually have antisocial personality traits. They lack empathy and see other people as tools to be used rather than human beings with feelings. That helps explain how David could look at my tears and worry and feel nothing but satisfaction that his plan was working. The financial recovery is going well. David had spent about $30,000 on the IVF treatments and living expenses, but the rest was still in accounts that the court was able to freeze. I'll probably get back around $40,000 of my original inheritance, which isn't everything, but it's something. More importantly, I'm learning to trust my instincts again. There were red flags I ignored, times when David's stories didn't quite add up, moments when his pain seemed to come and go conveniently, inconsistencies in his medical explanations that I rationalized away because I loved him. I want other people to know that financial abuse can look like this. It's not always obvious controlling behavior or taking someone's paycheck. Sometimes it's elaborate emotional manipulation designed to make you voluntarily give up everything you have. David knew exactly how to play on my love, my trust, and my fear of losing him to get what he wanted. If someone you love suddenly develops a mysterious medical condition that requires expensive treatment abroad, ask questions. Verify information independently. Trust your instincts if something feels off. Don't let love blind you to the possibility that you're being manipulated. I'm rebuilding my life now. I'm 34, divorced, and wiser than I ever wanted to be about human nature. But I'm also stronger. I survived the worst betrayal I can imagine, and I'm still here. I'm still capable of love and trust, even if I'll be more careful about who deserves those gifts. My grandmother always told me that money comes and goes, but character is forever. David showed his true character, and now everyone in his life knows exactly who he really is. As for me, I'm focused on rebuilding my character too, learning from this experience without letting it make me bitter or closed off to future love. Thank you for reading my story. If you've been through something similar, please know that you're not alone, and it's not your fault. Con artists and manipulators are skilled at what they do, and falling for their lies doesn't make you stupid or naive. It makes you human. Take care of yourselves and trust your instincts. They're usually right.